Thank you. Over to you, Reva, for your drosha.
Thank you, Marion, for doing the service so beautifully. Well, the parasha tonight is called Bo, B-O. And actually it means to go and be heard, or to go and tell. Today is a very auspicious day, not only because this parasha tells us about the last 3 plagues that were visited, and we'll be discussing much more about that tomorrow, on the Egyptians that ultimately forced Pharaoh to let his massive slave labor force go. However, today is also a unique day, the 27th of January. It is Holocaust Memorial Day, not to be confused with the day of the Shoah. Now, the Shoah is when we commemorate and mourn for our loss of 6 million Jews, which included, I think it was 1 million children, or many. This day is a day that is not called upon for us to commemorate the Holocaust by the Jews, but by the United Nations themselves. And I'm going to tell you more about this a little later on, and how in a miraculous way it ties up with comments that I have been studying about this parasha, particularly comments made by the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Last night, I attended the Memorial Day commemoration at the Holocaust and Genocide Center. Of course, they couldn't have it tonight or today because it's Shabbat, and normally it is therefore given yesterday with the United Nations and other in attendance. But first, let me rather start with the parasha. We now are on to the last 3 plagues. The one was locusts, and we know how many times our own fields and farms have been devastated through locusts. In the Torah, it says an east wind brought them. Then there was darkness upon the world. Well, even in nature, we know that there is a time where there is darkness in a certain area of the world, perhaps for 24 hours or more. And the 3rd plague, which seems so cruel, was the loss of the firstborn of every Egyptian, because after every plague, and the Bible doesn't make it clear, but of course the 10 plagues didn't happen in 10 days or even 10 weeks. We're not sure of the length of time. I must do more study on that and come back to you on that. But each plague was certainly a plague that happened in that era. And archaeologists and scientists looking at that era in the Middle East, and even today, I've been in Israel where they said the Khamsin happened, where everything is pitch dark as dust flies through the air. So we're not sure when or how long those 10 plagues took. And Hilda has brought up a very interesting question, which I'm going to go about talking about more tomorrow. But tonight, this parasha in a nutshell is virtually capsulated in the 10th plague. And I'm going to talk about that very shortly now, before I tie it up to this unique day in the history of mankind, where the United Nations asked us to remember. As the 10th plague is about to strike, Moshe knows that this will be the last one. Pharaoh will not merely let the people go. He knows that. After this plague, when children die, he will beg them to go. So I'd like you to think with me. It is more of a question of a plague bringing death to young children, as indeed the horrific COVID-19 plague has seen the death of many young children or babies. And so one can see this phenomena in terms of the biblical explanation, which the people had to have in those days, but it also is part of the phenomenon of a plague in which young children die. So on God's command, Moses now prepares the people for freedom. This is not after they've left. This is now before the 10th plague. He prepares them for freedom, but he does it in such a way that is unique. He does not talk about liberty. He doesn't talk about breaking the chains of bondage. He doesn't even mention the long journey that lies ahead of them to reach their destination of a promised land of freedom. A land that was Hashem, our God, swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, and the mothers for them. A land flowing with milk and honey. None of that is mentioned now, as Moses knows very well that after this plague, because he has that prophetic vision and voice of Hashem within him, he knows the people are going to take that long walk to freedom. This is what those 40 years were called. And look, that's what Mandela called his book, A Long Walk to Freedom. Instead, he doesn't talk to them about anything, about freedom or breaking bondage or nothing. Instead, he talks about children. 3 times in the course of this Parashat Bo, he turns to the theme of children, completely unexpected. He doesn't talk about tomorrow, what's going to happen on their journey. He talks about a distant future that will form part of the people's memory until the end of time. He wants each generation, hundreds of generations to come, to pass on the story to yet the next one. And he's looking way ahead of the current situation. We are taught to, as educators, the Jewish parents, the Jewish people are known as educators. This will ultimately lead to the whole Pesach story, which is also in this parasha, which we are commanded to share with our children every year and remind them of our freedom, remind them of our responsibility, remind them what freedom and a future means. And inspired by God, all this great energy, Moshe taught the Israelites to teach their children and to pass on the story from one generation to the next, and to look for a distant future. Why? So that distant future will be there for that distant generation to follow us and our children. And I might mention that the Chinese had a beautiful saying, because we're not the only guardians of truth. We know that the 10 Commandments existed long before a man called Abram had a moment when he understood one God, one energy, and one humanity. And the Chinese have this to say: if you plan for a year, you plant rice. If you plan for a decade, you plant a tree. But if you plan for a century, you educate a child. Isn't that absolutely amazing? Throughout history, Jews, and we can see Chinese and other people, but the Jews became famous for always putting education first. Where others build castles and palaces, we build schools and houses of study. And from this gave us the strength to survive adversity, to know that no matter how bad things are, there will be another generation, provided that memory can be kept alive. The memory at Pesach of leaving for Israel, the memory at our Yom HaShoah, which is still to come later in this year, of those who've died. But miraculously to me, the United Nations declaring this very day a Holocaust Memorial Day for the whole world. And I think that is totally extraordinary. And I'm going to just conclude with sharing the story of my experience last night, which was an exceptional view of the Holocaust and sharing that memory. We know, and this is a remark which I'm going to share with you by the Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory. We know how often it is said that, oh yeah, the Jews have won so many Nobel Prizes and they're so small, and yet they have a preponderance of winning Nobel Prizes. Let me share with you his remark. God never commanded us, thou shalt win a Nobel Prize. He wanted us to teach our children a story. He wanted us to understand, to our children, to understand who they are, where they come from, what happened to their ancestors to make them a distinctive people they became, and what moments in their history shaped their lives. And this is exactly the theme that the United Nations took last night at the Holocaust Museum, to give all children of humanity, it's one God and one humanity, to tell our children, to tell your children, to tell their children, to tell all humanity that to burn into history and memory, which will allow a sense of responsibility and carry on to the next generation. It is about telling the story and passing it across the generations in a unique way, in a different way. And here I will share with you how unique a way the story was passed on last night, not by the Holocaust Museum, but at the Holocaust Museum. And perhaps it is a sense of just of God's presence and of goodness, even in the face of evil in our society today. And I'm just going to read a short introduction and then ask Jacob, my high-tech guru, to share a short video with you. On the 27th of January 2005, the United Nations General Assembly had a special session in remembrance of the liberations of the Auschwitz concentration camp on that same day in 1945. I had the honor, through the Holocaust Center, of actually attending at Auschwitz the 60th anniversary of the liberation. And now, how many years later, and it was attended by people from all over the world, many more non-Jews than Jews. And Sharon was there, the Israeli Air Force flew overhead, but let me get back to the story. This is the first time in 2005 that an international organization representing many countries, many people, or representing, to me, humanity, made a remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust as a way to prevent future genocides. That is the importance of the Memorial Day today of the United Nations, to prevent further genocides. And so many have happened since then. The Rwandan, the Armenian, which still has to be recognized, and many others. And the General Assembly of the United Nations completely concurred to declare January the 27th today as the International Day in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. Over to you, Joe. Thank you very much, Jacob. And let me now share briefly an experience that I had last night when I attended this incredible Holocaust Memorial Day at the Holocaust and Genocide Museum. Of course, the ambassador of Israel was there, the ambassador of Germany was there, and the ambassador of Germany had the most incredible words, which I'd like to share with you another time. The representative of the United Nations were there, and other organizations. But the keynote speaker was Mr. Paul Salmons. And he has dedicated, I think, the last 20 years of his life. He is not Jewish. He is a historian. And at a very young age, as a young history teacher at schools in the United Kingdom, he was fascinated with this history of learning about this period where Nazis, the Nazi ruling party, had been so brutal and had tried to annihilate a whole people. And he has spent his career in teaching children about it specifically. And ultimately, he was approached by the United Nations specifically to be a curator at museums throughout the world of his understanding and his view and how he taught children about this horrific period, the greatest crime that has been ever taken against humanity and which is being repeated, perhaps not in so many millions, but every life matters. And this Mr. Paul Salmons totally fascinated me, because when you go to a Holocaust memorial or you go to a Holocaust museum, you see these pictures of thousands of shoes or suitcases or that. And he started his talk by showing us a photograph of thousands of shoes. Behind the shoes, you could see 2 chimneys. That spoke volumes where these shoes had come from. And there were these organized guards sorting the shoes out so that they could sell them. Whatever they took off the people's and little children's backs, it was methodically sorted out and it was turned to use by the Nazis. But he said he wanted to not show us the Holocaust through the prisms of thousands of shoes that you can even see when you go to Auschwitz. There are hundreds of shoes in one glass container. He wanted to give us glimpses of individual lives that he had researched and researched and researched. And now he does this all over the world with a special, unique exhibition, which is actually now on at the Holocaust Museum, and you can go and see it anytime. He finds specific items and he researches them at all costs, going through years of meticulous German documentation. And the first slide he showed us was a little child's shoe with a sock sticking out of it. It was so different that many people have noted this image, and he somehow found this image and a shoe of perhaps a 5-year-old child that he'd taken off and put his sock in, just as he had many times before, perhaps when he was at a football match or something and he wanted to play with them. And he tells a story around that little shoe and the sock. He actually went into unbelievable research, and he found out the child's name. He showed you photographs of this little child. He showed you photographs of the child with his family. And he went back into details of that one little child. And seeing the photograph that he found of the child who was connected, because all these shoes were marked in such a way so that the Germans would know which day they were and who was there. And he spent years, and he has developed a unique method. He is now the official curator for the United Nations, and he is putting up museums and exhibitions throughout the world. And Tali Natus of our Holocaust and Genocide Center brought him there for us. And I have never ever seen the Holocaust before in the eyes of one unique story with a shoe. And he showed us other heartbreaking garments, but he brought that child alive to us with a name, with a whole photograph of him and his family, which he found that they had all been annihilated. He then showed us a garment that a young man had worn with tzitzits coming out, a religious garment. And he searched that story and how that garment, someone passed it on, and it was saved by someone on those death marches who managed to escape and afterwards investigated. But let me conclude what to me is something exceptional. He concluded this whole exhibition with photographs. We could go upstairs later and see it, with a photograph that a little girl, a young Jewish girl, she had with her crayons, somehow she'd got them, in the concentration camp. It was in the uprising, in the ghetto. And she, before they went to a concert, and she pictured herself and a little girlfriend there, and she'd written the words. I'm not sure in what language, but she was in Vienna in the uprising in the ghetto and probably spoke Austrian then, type of German, and he translated the words for us. And the little girl with her that she had drawn in the picture was a non-Jewish girl who was her very best friend before they were all put in this horrific ghetto. And they were very best friends. And when this hatred of the Jew started coming and they were forced to live in this ghetto, her non-Jewish friends still managed to find a way in. And they were hidden. They were put in houses by some non-Jews as well, and they bricked themselves in even so that the Nazis wouldn't hear, and made a few bricks loose to escape. And one day, this little non-Jewish girl of 12 was sitting with her best friend, also hiding behind this fake brick wall. And the Nazis heard a movement, and they broke it down. And they were herding all of them out of the ghetto and probably on trains to Treblinka and other places. And this young Jewish girl who didn't survive the Holocaust said, please, this is my friend. She's not Jewish. I beg you to let her go, please. And they did let, like a miracle, the non-Jewish girl who proved she was a Christian. Maybe she had a cross on, we don't know, they let her go. And in that memory, when this young Jewish child was locked away, maybe in Auschwitz or Treblinka, I'm not sure, she wrote this beautiful little poem and drawing of herself. And she said prophetically she somehow knew she might never see this friend of hers again. And she hoped that one day her little poem about her and her friend and this drawing would reach her friend. So let me conclude on that to say it was an extraordinary evening, and yet today we read the very words in Bo that we are told to teach our children. And the United Nations, Baruch Hashem, have taken that. And today at the Holocaust Museum, there were 500 children from a black school in Orange Farm who will be guided through this exhibition and explain what happens when you hate another person, be it their color, their creed, their religion, their deformity, their sexuality. Shabbat Shalom. And please join us tomorrow morning if you can at 10 o'clock in Shul or on Zoom, where Hilda, I'll be answering your very provocative comment about the plagues. But just think of this wonderful man, Paul Solomon, and how he's through the United Nations teaching children all over the world, as he did today at our Holocaust and Genocide Museum, not to hate another, and particularly to fight xenophobia in our country. Shabbat Shalom.